And now on Book TV, a literary tour of San Bernardino, California, with the help of our local cable partners Time Warner and Charter. While in San Bernardino, we spoke with Jamal Nassar. We talked about his book, Globalization and Terrorism.
Starting with the history of terrorism, we will find that terrorism has been around from time immemorial. If we go back to the legends in the holy books, in the Old Testament, in the Jewish Torah, we'll remember cases of Samson. If you remember the story of Samson, where Samson, as he was captured, tortured, blinded, and then was to be fed to the lions. What did he do? He said, "On me, on my enemy and my enemies, oh my God." And he brought down the temple, killing thousands of innocent people. Perhaps one could say that Samson was the first suicide killer in history. And it continued on and on and on from generation to generation. But the word terror or terrorism comes from the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, shortly after the Revolution, we had about 7 years that were called the Reign of Terror, where they executed many people, used the guillotine, beheaded people, threw people in the Seine River, and so on. That era was called the Reign of Terror. That is where the word terrorism came out from. So it's not really something modern or something recent or something Islamic. It has been around for forever and ever. It's been with us for a long time. It hasn't stopped. The tools have changed over the years. But the act itself, the nature of the act, the reaction of people to oppression, to violence, has been with us for a long time. When people are oppressed, they're going to rebel. And when they rebel, sometimes they carry out acts that we now call terrorism. Terrorism today is not really different than terrorism of the past, except for the tools they use. The tools that are available nowadays are much more destructive. You can get on an airplane and have the airplane go into a building. That didn't exist in the past. What we had in the past is individuals going with their sword or with their gun to kill many innocent people. Today you can kill a lot more by having a bomb attached to your chest, or you're carrying it in your handbag, and if you're desperate enough to kill yourself and the others, you're going to be killing a lot more people than they would have in history. So terrorism today is more violent than the past. It is more severe, has a greater impact on civilians, and because of the media, it generates greater amount of fear among people. In the past, people heard stories. It becomes over time legends almost by the time it reaches another society. Nowadays it's instantaneous. The media tells us, right away, bombing in Brussels, bombing in Pakistan, bombing in France. And, it's instant. We see it right away because of TV, because of, media, because of communications. And therefore people become scared, become afraid. Right here in San Bernardino, we had terrorist attack back in December 2nd. And my own daughter works for the county, and my own daughter was there, and she was terrified then, and she continues to be terrified till today. She was in the midst of it, not where the shooting happened, but in the building nearby. She was stranded, held up for about 5 hours. It has an impact. It brings fear in the hearts of other people. The way it became Islamic, in a way, was the rise of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Under President Ronald Reagan, we recruited the Mujahideen. We recruited people from the Arabian Peninsula, from North Africa, from different places to go to Afghanistan to fight the old Soviet Union who was occupying Afghanistan in the name of Islam. And then after the war was over and we forgot about Afghanistan, they stayed there on their base. The word base in Arabic is Qaeda. So that was the beginning of Al-Qaeda. We, in essence, were the contributing factor that brought that about. And then they got very upset at us because we abandoned them. They tried to go back to their home countries. Their own countries didn't want them, armed, opposing their system because they've become so devoted to their version of Islam. And they felt very stranded and abandoned, and they tried to take revenge on the United States. And September 11 happened. And the invasion of Iraq brought on the current wave under ISIS or ISIL, the Islamic State of Syria and Iraq and Syria. If we didn't have a war in Iraq, there would have not been an ISIS. If we didn't help the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, they would not have been Al-Qaeda. So in a way, we had a hand in creating these types of groups. When we went to Iraq, we bombed. We bombed the country. We called it shock and awe. If you're an Iraqi trying to raise your children, trying to take them to school, feed them and do your job and raise your family, and all of a sudden you see these B-52s dropping bombs. The bombs are falling down. What do? You look up and say, God help me. When people are scared, they go back to God. They go back to religion. And then we say, oh, the Iraqis all of a sudden now are Islamists. Well, we pushed them there. We made them terrified. And when people are terrified, they pray, they go back to God. Religion becomes a greater part of their lives. And as a result now, they recruit people who are upset about the situation, whatever it may be, that situation. Somebody who lost an uncle or an aunt. Perhaps the killers in San Bernardino, husband and wife. The wife is new arrival from Pakistan. The husband from here who went back to Pakistan and brought her with him. Perhaps she lost somebody. Maybe to one of our bombings in northern Pakistan on the border with Afghanistan. She got very frustrated and she wanted to get back at us. When she saw this this Pakistani American coming in, maybe she hooked up with him in order to come here, in order to carry out some act. So there must be something. We don't know the details. There must be something. My guess is that the wife was the instigator behind it. And must have been something happening in her situation. We do bomb in their country. We have drones that drop bombs on leaders of Islamist groups in Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan. She may have lost a relative. She may have been frustrated by losing a friend. She may have been frustrated by something else, leading her to be determined to take revenge, to show the Americans somehow. What is happening in Europe is that we're beginning to have more ISIS attacks in European cities. And I think the reason for that is that the bombing campaign in Syria and Iraq, we have European countries joining in the bombing campaign. Also in Libya, when some people rebelled in Libya, immediately the European Union, NATO, the European Union and NATO joined in and began to bomb in Libya. They declared no-fly zone, but they could fly and bomb, and bringing down Gaddafi, actually murdering him at the end. And many people didn't forgive the Europeans for that. And the Europeans become a target. And also the coverage, as I mentioned, in the media, when in France the incidents happened, big media, big groups, people, leaders from all over the world going to Paris, flags at half-staff, UN Security Council meeting and condemning. But these acts happen all the time in Nigeria, they happen all the time in Kenya, they happen all the time in Somalia, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. And the Europeans don't move, they don't care. They don't call for a Security Council resolution to condemn these acts. And people feel, why? Am I lesser than others? And they get very frustrated. And then the Europeans become a target in a way because of that, plus the racism, the anti-Islamic racism that we find in Europe nowadays. That contributes to targeting Europeans. And we're beginning to see similar things in this country with this election cycle, the anti-Islamic attitude in this country, as if all Muslims are terrorists somehow or could become terrorists. It's really outrageous to label 1.5 billion people on earth by the behavior of the few. And I mean, if it's Timothy McVeigh doing Oklahoma City bombing, killing all these people, including children, it's Timothy McVeigh. We know him. We know his background. We know his family. We know his religion. We know everything about him. But if it is a Muslim who does such an act, it's immediately Islamic terrorism. We don't know much about the individual. We don't know much about the family or the background or anything. We label 1.5 billion people by the behavior of the 1 or the 19. It's wrong, very wrong. You cannot do that. Otherwise, we will be labeling Christians because some Christian went to a theater and started shooting, or went to a school and started shooting. That will be wrong, to put all the people together and label them by the behavior of the one or the few. And we're doing that in this country now. When the shooting took place in San Bernardino here, in our town where we're at now, I was at the restaurant and I saw it on TV. And what went through my mind immediately is my daughter. Not only this, it was my daughter, because she works for the county. And my daughter was in that area, and she was held up because of it, of course, and she was terrified. So that was the first thing. As a father, you worry about your children first. But then, as an American, a Palestinian Arab American, I'm not Muslim either, I'm Catholic actually. As an American, Arab American, I got very worried that the shooter or shooters may be Arab or Muslim. Thank God they weren't Arab. They're Pakistani, but they're Muslim. And that contributes to labeling the whole group by the act of these two. And it did so. But this community has been a fantastic community. The Muslims of the Inland Empire, San Bernardino and the areas around it, collected almost $250,000 for the victims. When Muslims had prayers on Friday after the shooting, Christian and Jewish ministers and rabbis and many people came and stood in front of the mosque so the Muslims could pray in peace inside. I love this community. This is an example for all of our country. This is how we should be. Work together as a community, protect each other as a community, and not think of the act of the one or the few as an act of the whole. And our community did very well with that. I'm very proud of San Bernardino community for what they have done. This book has been very good, has done very well. Actually, when it came out, it received the Choice Outstanding Book of the Year award. So it has been recognized. But it is recognized because it gives the perspectives not only of the powerful, but the perspective of those who are on the other side, who are on the receiving end of the powerful. I think that is the biggest message that I need people to know, that, hey, the other side, whom we call a terrorist, also has grievances, also may have some rights that we need to recognize, be aware of. That we, no matter how great we are, we do some things wrong. Like when we go and invade the country and bomb their people to smithereen, we do something wrong in doing that. So the notion of my country, love it or leave it, is in my opinion, a form of stupidity. It is our duty as Americans, and I became naturalized American long time ago, back in the middle 60s. I became an American. When I became American, I had to pass a test. And in that test, I learned that it is my duty to correct my country when I see my country deviate from what is right. When my country does wrong, it is my job to try to correct it. So I will never say my country right or wrong. If my country is wrong, it's my job to correct it. And that's what we need to do. That's a kind of message I'd like readers of this book to get, that we have a duty as citizens of this great country. I love this country, but I hate some of its policies, and I keep trying and working hard to correct them. That is what we need to do, to correct the policies of our country that have gone in the wrong direction. Many of those listening and watching this program, I hope not too many, I hope it's only a few, who will be thinking that this professor is just a radical who is justifying terrorism. I'm not justifying terrorism. I oppose terrorism. I oppose all sorts of violence. I think terrorism is counterproductive in the long run, and it is outrageous, and we need to find ways around it. But we don't need to be helping create it. We have helped create terrorism, and we need to find ways around it. I do not justify terrorism, I do not support terrorism, but I understand the motives that push people to terrorism. That doesn't mean I accept it, or I agree with it, or I support it. I do not. I hope that someday we will get beyond our nationalistic attitudes and begin to look at the betterment of all human beings and the rights of all human beings, and recognize that what divides us is simply an accident of birth. I didn't choose to be born in Jerusalem and be Palestinian born to a Christian family. I did not choose that. That's an accident of birth. That doesn't make me lesser than any other human being or more than any other human being. And if we recognize that and begin to work on the basis of that, that all life is precious, all human beings are important, regardless of their accident of birth, then we will be serving society in the long run.
You're